Good morning, dear Sangha. Today is the 3rd of June 2014, and we are in the still water meditation hall in the upper hamlet of Plum Village in our 21-day retreat. There are a few things that you already know, but we have to repeat anyway. It's like on the airplane, they always tell you how to fasten your seatbelt. In order to really enjoy our retreat, we have to fasten our seatbelt. The practice of mindfulness can help us generate a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness whenever we want. That is the truth. Because we do need a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness in order to be nourished. And mindfulness can help us generate a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness. And the principle is simple. Mudita and sukha. When you practice breathing in, you focus your attention on your in-breath. It may take 2 or 3 seconds to breathe in. And you ride on that in-breath and go home to your body. And that is the basic practice. Focus your attention on your in-breath and breathe in. And you bring your mind home to your body. Because in our daily life, very often our body is there, but our mind is not there. That is a state of dispersion. So one in-breath is enough for you to bring the mind home to the body. And when mind and body are together, you are established in the here and the now. You are present. You are fully present in the here and the now. And as you are established in the here and the now, you begin to notice there are so many wonders of life inside of you and around you. The blue sky, the fresh air, the beautiful tree, the tiny flower, many wonders of life. We are in the kingdom of God. We are in the pure land of the Buddha. And one in-breath is enough to bring us home to the pure land of the Buddha, the kingdom of God. We cannot deny the fact that wonders of life are there. A blade of grass, a tiny flower, a beautiful tree. All of them belong to the pure land of the Buddha, the kingdom of God. And one in-breath made in mindfulness alone can help us go back to the kingdom of God, to the pure land of the Buddha. Easy. And you recognize that you have so many conditions of happiness that are available. Because you are established in the here and the now, you recognize the many conditions of happiness. Like your eyes, which are in good condition, is one of the conditions of happiness. because you have eyes still in good condition. You only need to open your eyes, and then a paradise of forms and colors become available. And those of us who have lost our eyesight, we don't profit from that paradise. But because we still have eyes in good condition, the paradise of forms and colors is still available. So that is one of the conditions of happiness. The heart inside of us continues to beat regularly. We have a normal heart. And that is another condition of happiness. That those of us who have a problem, a heart problem, and our deepest desire is to have a normal heart. And we have a normal heart. And that is another condition of happiness. And we have plenty of conditions like that inside of us and around us. More than enough for us to be happy right here and right now. So that is the energy of mindfulness that can recognize these conditions of happiness. If you take a piece of paper and write down conditions of happiness that you already have, I'm sure that 1 page is not enough. 2 pages are not enough. 10 pages are not enough. You are very lucky, much luckier than many people in the world. And if you are not happy, because you are not mindful, mindfulness allowed us to recognize the many conditions of happiness that are already available. And when you recognize them, joy is born, happiness is born right away. And that is why a good practitioner can generate a feeling of joy or happiness whenever she wants. That is the art of happiness. Easy, simple, not expensive. You don't need money. So the first function of happiness is to help you generate a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness, because you need to be nourished by these feelings, and you can generate many of them each day to nourish you and to nourish the other person, because she also needs to be nourished. You can remind her that she is very lucky, that she has so many conditions of happiness, and you can make her happy. You can make him happy with that practice. And then when we go home to ourselves, we might notice that there is stress, tension and pain in our body. Painful feelings, painful emotions. And mindfulness helps us to calm them down. If you know the art of mindful breathing, mindful walking, you can generate the energy of mindfulness that has the capacity to recognize and hold, embrace your body and your feelings, your emotions, and you suffer less, like a mother holding her baby. So to suffer less is possible. And there is an art called the art of suffering. If you know how to suffer, you suffer much, much less. The one who does not know how to suffer, she suffers a lot. She is overwhelmed by suffering. But you who know how to suffer, you suffer much less. Because with mindfulness, you can hold your suffering and you calm it down the way a mother holding her baby. Like this is what we practiced this morning. Recognizing our suffering, our pain, hold it tenderly, and you suffer less. That is an art. The art of suffering, equally important. as important as the art of happiness. So mindfulness helps us to generate joy and happiness. Mindfulness helps us to take care of suffering. To handle pain, sorrow, fear, anger, like. So the art of happiness goes together with the art of suffering. And mindfulness can do more. Not only with mindfulness you can suffer less, but you can make good use of the suffering in order to create joy and happiness. The way you make good use of the mud in order to grow lotus flowers. There is a deep connection between suffering and happiness. Because happiness is made of non-happiness elements. It's like a lotus is made of non-lotus elements. Among the non-lotus elements, you have the mud, because if there is no mud, there is no lotus. The same thing is true with happiness. Happiness is made of non-happiness elements. And among these non-happiness elements, there is the element of suffering. Suffering has a role in making happiness. And we have to learn about the goodness of suffering. The goodness of suffering. Suffering is useful. Suffering is necessary. Like the mud is useful. The mud is necessary for the making of a lotus. So the practitioner knows that she can suffer less and she can go further. She can make good use of suffering in order to create happiness. The way we make good use of the mud in order to grow lotus. And this is not difficult to understand. Suffering is necessary. Suffering is needed if you want to create happiness. Suppose you look at someone who suffers. That person may be very close to you, and that person may have made you suffer a lot. And if you have enough time to look, and you can recognize the suffering in him or in her. Before that, you believe that it's only you who suffer, and that person does not suffer. He just makes you suffer. He does not suffer. But that is not true. If you have the time to look, you see there is a huge amount of suffering in him or in her. And because that person does not know how to handle the suffering, he remains victim of his suffering for all his life. He does not know how to handle suffering, does not know how to transform the suffering in him. That is why he continues to suffer. And of course he makes the people around suffer also, even if he does not want to. So he is the victim number one of his suffering. And you are only victim number two. And you begin to understand this. You begin to see the suffering in that person, and you begin to understand why that person continues to suffer and make people around suffer. And that alone is already enough for you to look at him or her with compassion. Poor fellow, he suffers so much. He does not know how to handle the suffering in him. He continues to suffer all his life and make people around him suffer. He needs help. So far no one has helped him. And I may be the first person to help him. So when you have seen the suffering, when you have understood the suffering, suddenly compassion is born in you. And when compassion is born, you don't suffer anymore when you look at that person. You don't want to punish him or her anymore. You want to help him or her to suffer less. There is already a transformation in you thanks to the fact that you got in touch with the suffering. So suffering is useful. We can speak of the goodness of suffering because understanding suffering brings about understanding and compassion, which are the true foundation of happiness. So there is a deep connection between suffering and happiness. And if we know how to make good use of suffering, we can create happiness. It's very clear that understanding suffering will bring about compassion and love. And a person without compassion and love cannot be a happy person. Therefore, our definition of the kingdom of God should change. A definition, if we define the kingdom of God as a place where there is no suffering, we have not understood the kingdom of God. We have not experienced the kingdom of God. Because if there is no suffering, there is no happiness. If there is no mud, there is no lotus. You cannot expect to have lotus alone without the mud. You need the mud to produce the lotus and to continue to nourish the lotus.